Hello, Petal. How you doing? How's your week been so far? How are things going? Welcome back for Chapter 3 of Life, Liberty and the Pursuit of Sausages, J.W. Wells & Co. Book 7. We've got a couple of new listeners and it's great having you here. Thank you very much for joining us. Always feel free to leave a comment in the comments section, have a little chat, a little bit of banter. We always love to see it. And if you do enjoy the chapters, if you could please leave a like, share and subscribe if you want to. But if you don't want to miss out on the new chapters, which we always do as instant premieres, please hit that notifications bell. All of that helps the channel because it shows me that you enjoy what I'm doing and I'll keep doing it. Right then, so I'm going to give it another few days for submissions of the funny holiday stories, and then when, let's say, probably cut it off on Sunday, and then, yes, any that I've received by then, I'll make a little series and read them out. So, if you do have a funny holiday story, please email it to me either by hitting the contact me section in the about me section or whatever it is, or you can email it to InkyBink, which is India November Kilo, India Bravo, India November Kilo at gmail.com, inkybink@gmail.com, and then just put in the header funny holiday story so I know it's from you. And if you don't get a response, send it again because there might be something wrong. It might have gone spam. You know how it is these days. Anyway, I am going to stop waffling because we're about to go to the darts match. What's going to happen? Is it going to be a little bit weird? Life, Liberty and the Pursuit of Sausages, J.W. Wells & Co. Book 7, Chapter 3 thereof. Stupid. Really stupid to get so uptight about a ridiculous office darts match. What could be simpler, after all, than to pretend she had a headache and back out? Somehow, she couldn't quite bring herself to do it, so she attacked her work instead, to take her mind off it. That's one of the few things work is good for. The drudgery, the pointlessness, the total lack of significance of most of the stuff the average office worker does during the day acts as a powerful analgesic to the troubled mind. Maybe it's because the petty annoyances of the office routine drive out the bigger, slower-moving worries of real life, in more or less the same way as little furry rat-like mammals inherited the earth from the dinosaurs. 10 o'clock came and went. No word from Don about the dress, and she assumed he was still wallowing in bed. She opened a file. Plot 16, Pretty Crescent. Some awkward sort of a solicitor had sent in a whole page of supplementary inquiries, and she'd been putting off doing them. She reached for a pencil and attacked the rotten, lousy job, which turned out to be quite simple and straightforward after all. And then she got a phone call from the solicitor in Evesham who'd liked her voice, thanking her for sending him whatever it was. No trouble, she replied briskly. That's what I'm here for. Which was, she reflected later, a terrible thing to say about yourself, even if it was true. She went to the kitchen, made herself a coffee, and took it into the library while she looked up Section 144CI of the Domestic Premises Act 2001. They called it a library, which was a bit like calling croquet on the vicarage lawn a fight to the death. All an outsider would have seen there was a slightly enlarged section of corridor with a couple of chairs parked in it and a line of bookshelves on one wall. There were books on the shelves, true enough, but they had the melancholy, something out of Chekhov look of books that never got opened because lawyers these days don't muck around with crushed tree sandwiches. They get their information online from comprehensive hourly updated cyber databases, fast as ICBMs and just as prone to causing mayhem when they crash. Today happened to be one of the days, on average there were 320 of them in a year, when Weblaw was down, or playing up, or simply not in the mood, and she needed the reference. She had to stand on the chair to get the book she needed, and while she was getting it, a spider ran across the back of her hand. Progress. Section 144CI could hide, but it couldn't run. Eventually she got it cornered in a footnote in an appendix, copied it out in longhand and returned the book to its eyrie. Then she put the chair back neatly where she'd got it from, picked up her coffee cup, which was empty. She stood staring into it for quite some time. Nothing to see except a little dark brown sludge. That's impossible, she thought. I was here the whole time, and I know I didn't drink it because I was busy the whole time. I had my hands full. She examined the floor, just in case she'd spilt it without realising, but there was no telltale stain on the pale industrial Wilton. As a last resort, she held the cup up to the light, looking for tiny pinholes in the bottom. This can't be happening, she thought. She felt an icy calm seep through her, a natural defence mechanism, she supposed, to keep her from freaking out and screaming the place down. So what? She told herself. So there's some sort of conspiracy around here to stop me drinking coffee. Big deal. I'll show them. She went back to the kitchen and made herself a nice strong cup of tea. Now, she didn't like tea much, but that was hardly the point. She took it back to her room, put it down on her desk, and did the business with section 144CI. That took about 6 minutes. Now then, she told herself, drink your tea before it gets cold. She took a wary sip. It was coffee. In the time it takes a barrister to earn £1, she jumped up out of her chair and hurled the cup away from her while her other hands rubbed savagely at her lips. This time it had gone too far. It was getting creepy, and she had had enough. Her first instinct was to get out of there, leave the building and not come back. Only the thought of how she'd explain her actions at her next job interview made her change her mind. She was a rotten liar, and if she told the truth, they'd either disbelieve her and not give her the job, or believe her and assume she was crazy. Besides, she was braver than that, she told herself, and thought, see what I mean, rotten liar? It's only coffee, she decided. Hardly life-threatening. Weren't there stories about people who'd lived in haunted houses for years and who reckoned they regarded the ghosts as somewhere between pets and old friends? She hadn't thought of it in those terms before. So, fine. My office is haunted by an unquiet spirit who likes coffee, does some of the difficult drafting for me, sometimes answers the phone when I'm out, not 100% about passing on the messages, but nobody's perfect. What exactly is so bad about that? A slow tide of coffee was gradually dripping down the opposite wall. She wiped it off with a couple of tissues and binned the bits of broken cup. It wasn't so much what the ghost did, it was knowing she didn't dare tell anybody about it. That and the extremely unpleasant hours she'd spent believing she was losing her mind. But that was all poisonous effluent under the bridge now, and she was prepared to think no more about it, provided what? That it didn't get any worse? Yes, she decided, I'll settle for that. The best thing would be to rise above it, fail to take official notice, like a government not recognising a nasty foreign regime. She wasn't sure that'd be possible, but she could see no reasonable alternative to giving it a try. The phone rang. She sat down and answered it, but it wasn't Dawn, just some woman. It turned out that she and her husband had bought a house on the development before last, and she wanted to know some trivial detail about boundaries. Of course, it wasn't BRHD's place to advise her on that, now that the purchase was completed. As it happened, though, she still had the file in her cabinet, and the woman seemed perfectly nice and polite. She got the file out and looked through it. Before my time, actually, she said. My predecessor handled your purchase, but it's all here in the file. Hold on, let's see. Yes, you're responsible for the east-facing fence, and your neighbour owns the other side. I can send you a copy of the plan if you like. That would be ever so kind of her. No problem. It was her pleasure. It's such a nice house, the woman was saying. We're so pleased with it. Such a good neighbourhood. And of course, the views are wonderful. We love sitting out on the patio in the evening, looking out over the woods with the hills in the background. She made it sound as though Polly had designed and built the house with her own two hands, just for them. which was rather nice, and all the better for being unexpected. "Thank you," she said awkwardly. "I'm glad you're settling in so well." "Best thing we ever did, dear, moving here. We always wanted to retire to the country, but prices are so terrible, especially these days. I honestly don't know how you do it for the money." A few more pleasantries of that sort, and the woman rang off. A satisfied customer, apparently. For some reason, Polly felt better because of that. Being a lawyer, therefore bred to cynicism the way collies are raised to chase sheep, she'd taken it for granted that the houses they built and sold were nasty, overpriced little boxes, and their customers were gullible fools. Maybe not, in which case maybe her job, and therefore her life, weren't as pointless and malign as she'd always assumed. She gathered up the papers and started putting them back in the file. Hold on a moment. There was something written on the inside cover, written in such teeny-tiny handwriting that she could barely read it. Luckily, she had a magnifying glass in her desk drawer for checking out details on deed plans and the like. She retrieved it and bent her head low over the folder. "There is something very odd going on in this office," she read. "Well, more like lots of little very odd things. It's enough to make me think I'm going mad. Maybe I am. I don't know." "Oh," she thought, "if it goes on much longer, I'll have to tell someone. I can't cope with bottling it all up inside me like this. I think I'll explode. The trouble is that it all sounds so silly, but it's not silly. It's something big and dangerous. I'm sure of it. I think something bad must have happened to whoever had this job before I did. I suppose I ought to go to the police, but they'd just laugh or have me locked up. I can't go on like this. If only I didn't need this stupid job so badly. NB, remember to put car in for MOT, dishwasher being delivered Friday AM, collect cushion covers, 3 pounds Calibres, 6 onions, mince for shepherd's pie, soap powder, kitchen towels, aspirins." That was all. She read it twice, then slumped back in her chair. I could have done without that, she thought. It really doesn't help matters. All this fuss over a few cups of stupid instant coffee. And anyway, if her weird handwriting was anything to go by, £1 to a penny, whoever it was that wrote that really was off a red. Which I'm not, she reminded herself firmly. At which point the phone rang again. Don.
"Just thought I'd let you know I haven't forgotten."
"What?"
"About your dress. I'm just off to ask about it now."
"Forget about that," she said impatiently. "Listen." When she'd finished, he said,
"Do you still want me to go and ask about your dress?"
"Bugger the stupid dress." On balance, probably a no. "What do you make of that, then?"
"I'm not sure,"
he said slowly.
"I've got to say, it sounds a bit iffy to me."
"Me too."
"But then,"
he added,
"so would you, if I didn't know you well enough."
"Thank you so very fucking much."
"You asked. And look, about this tea business. Are you quite sure you didn't just think about making tea and then go ahead and make coffee instead?"
"No, of course not."
"It's the sort of thing I do sometimes."
"If that's meant to reassure me," she said icily, "it doesn't. The reverse, in fact." He knew that particular mood, and he couldn't really blame her. There did seem to be something odd going on at her office, and in her shoes he'd most likely be stressing out about it too. Even so, the important thing right now was to calm her down before she worked herself up into a state and did something permanent.
"Tell you what,"
he said.
"Why don't you have a sudden migraine and go home? Get out of there for the rest of the day. Think about it calmly and rationally."
"I can't," she snapped. "I've got this ridiculous bloody darts match tonight."
"Screw the darts match,"
he said.
"It's not like you actually want to go. Besides,"
he added slyly,
"you can't go. You haven't got anything to wear. Talking of which,"
he continued,
"do you want me to go and check out the dry cleaners or not? I will if you insist, but there's other stuff I could be doing."
"What? Oh yes, do it. One less thing for me to worry about. And if you do manage to get my dress back, jump on a bus and bring it here straight away." all right? Which he took to mean that she wasn't going to take his advice and go home. Ah, well, he rang off, put on his trousers, shoes and a jacket, and made for the front door. At the last moment, he remembered the fancy pencil sharpener, which he had to give back, assuming he managed to find someone to give it back to. If not, of course, he could keep it. Lucky him. Subconsciously, in spite of what Polly had told him, he must have been expecting to find that the dry cleaners was exactly where it had been yesterday. It wasn't. The convenience store, the video library, the mobile phone shop, but no dry cleaners. That stopped him in his tracks, and he stood quite still for a moment, staring. Then he went into the convenience store. The nice lady told him no, there was no dry cleaners there. She believed there was one in Albion Street. That's straight down the road. First left, second right, then second left. Keep going till you see. He tuned out. She and her husband had been running their store for 7 years, ever since they moved down from Leicester. He bought a Mars bar and a packet of drawing pins, thanked her and left. He crossed the road and stood exactly opposite the store, looking closely at the invisible line dividing it from the video library. Invisible being the relevant word. No sign of a crack, joint, seam, emergency filling or rendering. His guess was that the same landlord owned all the shops in the group, because the upper stories were one continuous spread of homogeneous brickwork, all painted the same colour, as far as he could judge, all at the same time. The roof tiles matched and were equally discoloured. With his phone he took a couple of pictures. Next, he walked up the street to the corner and then back again, past the shops, to the next road, counting the number of buildings. Then he went home. Back at his flat, he logged on to Google Earth and zeroed in on Clevedon Road. The pictures he got were understandably hazy, but he saved them and got to work with a high-powered enhancement program he'd got free with the magazine. They were, of course, aerial photographs, so he couldn't see the shop frontages. But he counted the number of roofs and found that it didn't tally by 1 with the count he'd made earlier. He double-checked. That was when he got the funny feeling in the pit of his stomach. Next, he uploaded the pictures from his phone and used another free program to rotate them through 90 degrees for a bird's-eye view. All that achieved was a series of straight lines, but it did give him the relative proportions of the frontages. He superimposed them onto the Google pictures and got a confused tangle of overlapping lines. The Google people don't tell you when their wonderful images were taken, but he got lucky there. Outside the convenience store was a newspaper sandwich board. Zooming in and enhancing, he was just able to make out the headline. The results of the Tunbridge by-election, which meant the photo was something like 18 months old. At this point he got up, soaked a flannel in cold water and laid it across his forehead. Didn't help. The next 2 hours were extremely boring, but, thanks to the net and a surprisingly helpful woman at the council offices, he established that, as far as local government records were concerned, there had never been a dry cleaners in Clevedon Road, and the block in question, built in 1926 by a local speculative builder called Morrison, sold by his daughter in 1969 to a property company, Yule Vasey, consisted of 17 properties. Could she please confirm that? 17. Yes. Not 18. No. Thank you so much. Yule Vasey had been taken over in 1974 by city and suburban property portfolios, who in 1982 succumbed to the blandishments of Higson Trust, who in turn sold out to White Shark Property in 1995. White Shark was a wholly owned subsidiary of Western General Holdings, which had merged in 2002 with the Chen Hua Group. A nice lady at Western General promised to call him back, but didn't. At this juncture, he paused to gobble ibuprofen and take stock. Local government, his phone camera, and his own 2 eyes all agreed that there were 17 buildings on Clevedon Road between Chamberlain Street and Spencer Way, and that none of them was now or ever had been a dry cleaners. On the other hand, approximately 18 months ago, Google's eye in the sky had plainly seen an 18th roof. Furthermore, the roof currently situated next door to the convenience store was something in the order of 1.5 meters longer than the one Google had seen there when it glanced down from the bar of heaven. Back to the search engines. He had to pay money for it, but he managed to get a download of the 1934 edition of the Ordnance Survey, the large-scale version used by lawyers and estate agents to draw up plans. 18 buildings. Next, he got onto the Land Registry, who were delighted to help on payment of the appropriate scale fee, but could only release information on receipt of the relevant form, a copy of which they sweetly put in the post to him. Something to look forward to. He also ordered a copy of the latest edition of the Ordnance Survey. By then, however, he'd come to the conclusion that he had enough data. More than enough. Clearly, there were two opposing schools of thought here. The 18s and the 17s, and it didn't really matter which side of the Land Registry and the OS people chose to adhere to. What mattered was the divergence of opinion. On his desk, next to his computer, he'd placed the receipt he'd been given when he picked up his trousers and overcoat. Only yesterday. He looked at it for a long time, then closed his eyes and tried to think. He knew there had been a dry cleaner's there because he'd seen it, been inside it. He had the receipt. The polythene wrapping his clothes had come back in, salvaged from the bin, a bit worse for wear and coffee grounds, but undeniable in its physicality, and of course the pencil sharpener. He found that he was humming the old 80s song that includes the words, "I would like a souvenir, just to show the world was here." On the other hand, which by now was rapidly turning into the other tightly clenched fist, he'd been there, looked, walked and counted, and he had City Hall to back him up. There were 17 buildings in that block, and none of them dry-cleaned clothes for money. Shit, he thought. He looked at his watch, then Googled a chart of time zone differentials. Unless they were hopeless insomniacs in Hong Kong, the Chenhua people wouldn't be answering their phones for another 8 hours. He sent them an email, tried Western General again, got through to another nice lady who promised to call him back. "All right," he said to himself, "so what am I supposed to do about it? I don't want to right wrongs, find out the truth that is out there, or solve the fundamental mysteries of quantum fluctuations in the space-time multimatrix. I just want to get my sister's party dress back, so she'll stop worrying and get off my case. Presumably it's my civic duty to tell someone in authority, just in case this is the tip of some catastrophic iceberg. But even if I could figure out who I'm supposed to tell, they'd only laugh at me. And if not the authorities, then who? You and yours? Esther Ranson?" He spared a brief moment of compassion for all the honest people out there, in Oklahoma and places like that, who come home from being abducted by aliens to find Elvis gabbling away in their microwaves again. People who've seen something and know it's true, but can't or daren't pass on the news to the rest of the species. Their biggest mistake, he'd always thought, was wanting to. The fatal urge to communicate to an outside world that simply doesn't want to know. Human ignorance, after all, invalidates nothing. The world was just as round before Columbus was born, and gravity would still have worked if Isaac Newton's father had never planted an apple tree in the garden. By the same token, he appeared to have stumbled across evidence of the existence of a phenomenon that could gobble up a building and partially erase its existence from the timelines. So what? Big deal. If he was prepared to miss out on paragraphs in science textbooks and having his portrait on a 50p stamp, he was under no obligation to share. But that wouldn't get Polly her dress back. More to the point, turning a blind eye would mean he'd have to lie to her, and for some reason he didn't want to do that. Telling her the truth, on the other hand, she'd believe him. That was the awkward part. She'd believe him, and what effect was that likely to have on her already precarious mental state? Maybe, he thought, I could just buy her another dress. Nice idea, but it wouldn't work. For one thing, he knew how incredibly picky she was about stuff like that. It had to be exactly the right size, shape, colour. God only knew what else. There were all sorts of technical things he knew nothing about, and even if he was unbelievably lucky and managed to get her something she liked, that'd do him no good at all. "Why have you brought me a dress, Don?" she'd say, "when you couldn't even be bothered to remember my last 3 birthdays? If you've started buying me presents, things must be really, really bad." No, in order for that to work, it'd have to be an exact replica of the one that had appeared to have fallen down the back of infinity, and the chances of finding something like that were infinitesimally small. Stupid of him to consider it. He shifted in his chair, and something jabbed him in the thigh. It turned out to be the corner of the pencil sharpener, which was still in his pocket. He sighed, took it out, and put it on the desk. Yesterday, in some weird kind of way, it had been a source of inspiration. But the mess he was facing now was something he couldn't just sharpen his way out of. He picked it up again. A ridiculous object, fussy and ostentatious. It was warm. Well, of course it was. He'd just taken it out of his pocket. He turned it over a couple of times. He could probably get a £5 for it on eBay. "It came to me, my own, my precious." But it wasn't his birthday, and it was silly to imagine that it had anything to do with him finishing off the jingle so painlessly. He sighed and let it fall off the palm of his hand onto the desk, which cracked down the middle and split in two. "Oh," he thought. He knelt down and picked it up from where it had landed on the carpet. Definitely warm. His desk was sagging in the middle where the top had split. "I've had just about enough of this," he thought, and stood up to lift the computer to safety. With a soft click, the desktop came together again. Mended. Good as new. Not even a mark. Or a seam. Reminded him of something. He frowned. It was one of those moments when he wished he did a lot of serious drugs, because then he could blame it all on a flashback. "All right," he thought. "Here goes." He closed his hand around the pencil sharpener until he could feel its corners digging into the palm of his hand. "If you're so clever," he thought to himself. No, to it. "What about a dress for my sister?" There was no movement. No twitch glimpsed out of the corner of his eye. It was just there, lying neatly folded on the desk where the crack had been, with dry cleaner's plastic all around it. Holding the pencil sharpener tight in his right hand, he reached out with his left and drew the dress towards him. At the point where the arms of the hanger were twisted around to form the hook, there was a label. Green, with a number. The day before yesterday's date, the name Mayor in blue pen, and a printed address in Clevedon Road. It was as though someone had kicked his knees out from under him. He landed arse first in the chair rather than sat down, and his eyes didn't seem to want to focus. "So that's it," he said angrily to himself. Magic. Angry. He was furious. In a lifetime of rational thought, in a lifetime dedicated to the twin goals of reasonable, logical explanation and doing as little work as possible, and now he discovered that there was magic in the world. It was insulting. It was how Columbus would have felt if he'd sailed 2 days beyond the Azores and found himself falling off the edge. He could just about reach the phone from where he was sitting. He dialed a number. "Polly Mayer, please."
"One moment."
Pause.
"She's not answering her phone right now. Can I take a message?"
He breathed out heavily.
"Yes, tell her Don called. I've got it here, but she can damn well come over and pick it up."
"Got that. Thank you for calling."
Magic. For crying out loud, the super bloody natural. One pencil sharpener to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. Well, he wasn't having that. What if, he cringed, his jingle, his masterpiece, his 7-note Brandenburg concerto turned out to have been composed by magic? by the grossly over-specified graphite nibbler still snuggling in his right hand, and not by him at all. He wasn't sure he could handle that. Surely it would invalidate what should have been the crowning glory of his career, and that in turn would undermine everything else he'd ever done or would do in the future. How could he ever bear to work again? Yes, whispered a little voice in his head, but with magic you'd never need to work again, huh? Ever. Pause. Backspace. What did you just say? With magic, the little voice insinuated, you could be rich, effortlessly rich, have anything you wanted, just like that. Well, how about it? Another pause then. You did always say you were only in it for the money. Yes, he conceded, I do tend to say that, don't I? And if all I had to do was snap my fingers... He snapped his fingers and nothing happened. Ah, he thought, a gadget moment. As in, you've brought it home from the shop, you've burrowed through the cardboard and the polystyrene and the shrink wrap, you've plugged it in and switched it on and it doesn't work, and the instructions are in Arabic, Cantonese and Lithuanian. He knew all about that. All the more reason, therefore, to ignore it, pretend it hadn't happened, dump the pencil sharpener in a bin somewhere, go back to a world governed by Newton and Einstein and equations and times tables, where everything makes sense eventually if you work away at it for long enough. He looked at the dress. Horizontal stripes. Ew. But it was there, on his broken amended desk. Magic had put them both right. Admittedly, magic had caused the problems in the first place. Maybe that was all it could do, clear up its own messes. But then he thought about the seventh note. Had that been magic too? If so, how dare it? Intrusive, interfering, bossy, always having to know best, as bad as his mother, well, almost as bad. He could have got that note perfectly well on his own. Given time. Given a lot of time. Maybe. It was as though he'd won first prize in a competition he hadn't entered. Something big and flash and horrendously expensive, which he didn't actually want, but he'd won it, so there was an obligation. The thing about shrink wrap was, of course, that once you've opened it, you can't take the product back to the shop for a refund, and you're bound by the terms and conditions, even if you never wanted it in the first place, and you don't know how to make it work. He snapped his fingers again. Zilch. Not exactly a fair test, since he hadn't actually been wishing for anything at the time. He made a decision. Stop sulking, concentrate, try and get this thing up and running. He sat down at his desk and closed his eyes. His mind went blank. He sighed. What he needed to do was run a controlled experiment. Quantifiable results, definitive success-failure parameters, and preferably something that wouldn't blow up the planet or bend the fabric of reality if he got it wrong. Science. Scientific method applied to the quantification of bloody magic. Crazy. I would like, he said out loud, a £10 note. He waited. Nothing happened. Try saying the magic word. Please? Still nothing. No humming noises, tingling sensations, gusts of wind, flashes of blue light. He searched the desk in case it had got lodged under something. Nothing there. He tried to remember exactly what he'd done when he'd conjured up Polly's dress. The trouble was he couldn't remember doing anything. He could feel a tight knot of tension in his chest, the one he tended to think of as the rain-stalling AOL sensation. Then the thought occurred to him. He took out his wallet, opened it, and found a £10 note where there hadn't been one before. Well, of course. Magic, it appeared, was logical. Ask for money, it delivers it to where money is kept. Where else? Now that put a slightly different complexion on it. £10 for doing nothing. He held the note up to the light, made sure the Queen was looking in the right direction, ran a finger over it to see if the ink smudged. £10. Another thought struck him. He logged on to his online banking program and called up his current account. Withdrawals, £10, today's date. Disappointing, but at least it provided useful data. He'd wished for a dress for Polly, and what he'd been given was Polly's dress. Not a brand new one materialised out of the ether, but her actual dress from the dry cleaners. The significance had escaped him at the time, because that precise dress was the one he'd wanted. Could it be that magic couldn't create anything? Thanks to a childhood's worth of storybook misinformation, he assumed that magic could pull stuff out of the air like a Star Trek replicator. Maybe it couldn't do that. Indeed, no reason to assume that it could. Maybe it could only affect stuff that already existed. He wanted a dress for Polly to go to her darts match in. He got the missing horizontally striped monstrosity. He wanted £10. They sent him £10 that already existed in his bank account. No, he was missing the point. There were loads of £10 notes in the world, real, physical ones, pieces of printed paper. Only a tiny proportion of them was he entitled to treat as his own. Magic had selected one of that tiny subset to fulfill his order. Did this imply an ethical dimension? If magic could only handle things that already existed, then it followed that it could only affect property, stuff that belonged to somebody or other. Maybe magic couldn't bring him a dress or a banknote that belonged to somebody else, because that would in effect be stealing. Interesting hypothesis. How did it apply to the seventh note? It could be argued that it did apply, since he'd have found the note for himself sooner or later, and therefore, in a sense, it was his note in the eyes of transcendental metaphysical law. All magic had done was let him have it earlier than usual. On one level, quite like that theory. It meant that the cheating aspect wasn't quite so bad. Also, it suggested that the scope of magic was severely limited, which suited his preferred view of the world. The broken desk. Now, well, that fitted too. Magic broke his desk. Magic had fixed it. If he went to the flat next door and smashed a window, would magic fix that for him? He considered trying the experiment, but decided on balance not to. On another level, it suggested that his new gadget wasn't nearly as good as he thought it was. He conceded a certain degree of disappointment. It was the free with this issue radio alarm clock that stops working after 24 hours, worth exactly what he'd paid for it. Natural justice. That's the thing about natural justice. It may be just, but it's seldom fair. Nature's approach to deciding which child should have the disputed toy is to break the toy. And then he thought, just look at yourself, will you? Probably the most important discovery in human history, and you're grousing because maybe it doesn't do everything you were led to believe it could do by your recollections of my first book of fairy tales. That's on a par with Archimedes vaulting out of the bath, yelling, "Oh shit, I've spilt water all over the floor." Order, order. He pulled himself together and took stock. First, and arguably most important, he'd got Polly's dress back for her. Job done. Second, in the process of doing the first, he'd discovered that magic existed. Well, that's interesting, dear, as his mother would say. And that, possibly because he was the current owner of a stupid brass pencil sharpener, he could do magic. Sort of. A bit. He could break desks and then mend them again. He could retrieve lost garments. He could get money out of the bank without having to walk to the corner of the street and use the ATM. Useful accomplishments, all of them. Even so, right now, if offered a choice between magic and a Black & Decker workmate with usefulness the main criterion, it would have to be the workmate. No contest. So what was he going to do about it? He went into the living room, sat down in his fat, slightly broken, comfortable chair, closed his eyes and tried to think. He chased thoughts up and down and round, hauled them up in corners, waited for them to poke their noses out and pounced on them, until eventually he understood what the question really was. namely, do I want to get involved? Find the question, and 7 times out of 10, you realise you already know the answer. No, he thought, I don't. In fact, it's the last thing on earth I want, even if it meant I could save the rainforest, find a practical alternative to fossil fuels, and make the perfect omelette. Some gadgets come at too high a price. I don't need that kind of aggravation. There's nothing I want badly enough, which probably means, he realised with considerable surprise, I'm perfectly contented and happy with my life. Gosh, fancy that. Somebody was clouting his door, by the sound of it, with a clenched fist. That must be Polly. Everybody else rang the bell, but she maintained, and he had no reason to doubt her word, that she couldn't get it to work. Just press the button, he kept telling her. I did, she'd reply, and nothing happened. Well, she said. Hello, come in, he replied. She pushed past him. Did you get it? What are you doing here? It's only 4:10. You should still be... I couldn't wait. Pretended I had a toothache. Did you get it? He nodded. Remember to talk funny when you get back, like your mouth's still frozen. Did you? Yes. He led her into the living room and pointed. There, he said. Is that it? She was clawing at the plastic. Why can't women unwrap things in an orderly fashion? Yes, she said. So, you found the place all right? Was it George Washington who couldn't tell a lie? Or was he thinking of Mr. Spock? Either way, he felt sorry for him. No bother, he said. They'd moved. A statement, not a question. It would have been rude to contradict her. That's right, he said. She was holding the dress up, examining it. I thought that had to be it, she said. After all, a shop doesn't just vanish into thin air. She sounded happy. Well, maybe not positive happy, but free from anxiety and stress. I'd better be getting back to the office, she said. Then, on the doorstep, very much the afterthought, thanks. And then she was gone. No problem, he said, to the gap where she'd been. Oh, Polly's got her dress back and Don's got a pencil sharpener. Sounds like a rather odd nursery rhyme, but we can deal with this because it's a Tom Holt book and we love them. If you want to be notified of the next chapter as and when it comes available for you to have a listen to, please hit that notifications bell because it has the double whammy of helping out the channel, as does leaving a like if you enjoy how I narrate the books. And please, by all means, leave a comment, have a little chat, a little bit of banter in the comment section. We always enjoy to have a little bit of a blether, as we'd call it. As ever, if you've read the books, I know most of you have. Shh, don't tell what's going to happen. You know. Not even whispering behind your hands in the back row. So, yes, keep it a secret. So, yes, if you want to be involved in the retelling of funny holiday stories, please email me at inkybink@gmail.com. That's inkibink@gmail.com. That's India November Kilo, India Bravo, India November Kilo @gmail.com. And tell me your story. If you want me to credit you with it, put your name on there. If you don't want me to credit you with it, just say you'd like it to be anonymous, and we can do that way. That's no problem at all. And I'll be able to read them out and let people know about your funny holiday stories. Because obviously we're coming up to holiday season for most people, but no, I need to hide from the sunshine. It's far, far, far too aggressive and antisocial for me. The awesome suggestion for the tune at the end of the chapter today was the flumps, and I frickin' love the flumps. 10 points if anybody can remind me what Grandpa's musical instrument was called, because it was absolutely delightful. But I always remember Pootle was my favourite, and even to this day I say, oh, I'm just pootling about, toddling along. But the tune, if I remember, it was bop 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 bop. Yeah, so I don't remember the actual song though. But yes, the flumps were awesome. It was so cute. Stop frame animation. A big favourite of the 80s. Ah, those were the days. Sorry, I went somewhere then with that one. So I guess I better end the chapter so we can get on, and then hopefully be able to get another one to you either tomorrow or the day after. Hay fever, be willing, because it's been really quite aggressive. Anywho, have a good sleep, have a good rest, have a nice couple of days. If you're working, I hope it goes well and it flows nicely and people aren't total bellends. So, big loves and hugs and stuff. Take it easy, Petal, and I'll see you in a couple of days' time. I don't really remember the tune, but effort and all that jazz. See you later.